thinking how to begin this lesson this morning. I was thinking about when I was 17, and it just astounds me that was 50 years ago. When I remember when I was 17, and I knew somebody in their 60s, and I thought, that old man, does he know what he's talking about? I mean, look, I got my friend, we all know this stuff, and that old guy, I wonder, is that how young people perceive me? But when I'm talking to teenagers, they say, well, Mike, I wonder what they think of us. You remember the old guys? And sometimes wonder, would they pay any attention to what I'd say? How could I talk to young ladies, being an old man like this? Would they pay any attention to what I say? But, Mike, we paid more attention, I think, than those old fellas thought we did. And I think so, too. I'm going to be talking, it sort of puts a preacher in an awkward position here. I'm going to be talking about women today. And I'm going to show you those that might better talk about this. Is going to be part of the lesson. But here's Timothy. Here's a picture of Timothy. Paul has been to Ephesus. And he said, Timothy, there's some things you need to address. You remember when God told Moses to go talk to Pharaoh? He said, well, who am I? He says, tell him I sent you. Timothy's going to have to address some issues in Ephesus. Now, Timothy, who am I to tell him? He said, look, I'm going to send you a letter. Just read it to them. You let them know this is coming from me. And I've charged you with this. And so Timothy's going to deal with a lot of issues. That's how I want the ladies to listen this morning. This isn't coming from Bill, okay? I've got Paul's letter we're going to be studying. He writes this with the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. That's what we're going to focus on. So we're going to see what it is that the Spirit has to say to the ladies. It's about women professing godliness. That is part of this text. Let me read the text to you, and we'll look at that expression. 1 Timothy chapter 2. In verses 8 through 10, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair or gold or pearls or costly array, but which becometh, here's the expression, women professing godliness with good works. Well, let's talk about that. That which is becoming, that which is suitable. It's what y'all expect out of women like this. This is proper and good. Professing godliness. Let's talk about godliness. Godliness. We're going to be talking about that on Sunday nights here in a week or two. We're adding to our faith virtue, and the virtue knowledge, and the knowledge temperance, and the temperance patience, and the patience. I think the next one is godliness. What are we talking about? It's not godlikeness. That sounds like that. But this has to do with a reverence toward God. What will we see in a woman that has reverence for God? Eve in the Garden of Eden. If she had had a proper reverence for God, she would not have partaken of that forbidden fruit. She knew she wasn't supposed to, but she was deceived. The Satan beguiled her and she deceived. She took and she gave it to Adam and he ate. And it shows a lack of reverence for God. We're going to talk about women, and women are forbidden to preach in the church. Well, how can that be? Listen, a godly woman is going to recognize. God told Eve, you can eat of all the fruits of all the trees in the garden, but of the fruit of this tree, don't eat it. And women can do all the good works of all the things that there are to do in the church, but when it comes to exercising authority, women don't do it. It's forbidden. And that's why they're not doing it. It wasn't demeaning to Eve to forbid her to eat of that fruit. It's not demeaning to women to put restrictions on what they do in the church. But with reverence for God, godly women are going to respect that. Let me go the rest of the passage we're going to look at this morning. Let the women learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing, if they continue in faith and charity and holiness with sobriety. Okay, we're going to talk about a lot of questions about what are we talking about here? And we're going to be exploring that. Now, he's talking about behavior in the church. Some people say, well, but this is just talking about in the home. And God says, yeah, wives be subject to the husband. This just applies to the home. And how can what is an improper way? Think about this. What's an improper way for a woman to teach her husband in the home that is not also an improper way for a husband to teach his wife in the home? I mean, this falls on the face of it that this is just talking about the home. And Peter says in this book, 1 Timothy 3:14-15, these things I write unto thee that thou mayest know how thou oughtest behave thyself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God. He's talking about things that have to do with the church. Some have taken this so far that says, well, a woman can't have any authority over any man at any time. Well, that's not what this is talking about. Ladies, if you were to have a plumber come to your house, would he have authority over you? Well, no. You would have the authority over the plumber in this business transaction you're doing. It's not talking about those things. It is talking about things having to do with the household of God, the church of the living God. Okay, let's look at this. I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands. That word for men, it's not the word he had used throughout 1 Timothy chapter 2. He's been talking about anthropos, mankind. All of this includes men and women. But when he came to this verse, in verse 8, he didn't use the same word. He used the word for males. There's a change here. That males pray everywhere. He's not saying that women can't pray. He's talking about those leading the prayer. That's what the lifting up of holy hands, that's what the prayer leader does. He gets the attention, see, when he's praying. Does he have to lift his hands to get that attention? Well, keep reading. This is what we read. Likewise, the women also. You see the contrast? And it says, the women with shamefacedness. If you dig down, do a word study and go to the roots of that word, shamefacedness, you know what that's describing? Here it is. It's with downcast eyes. You've seen that, haven't you? Women. I mean, there's some of the women here today, if I called their name out, you know what they would do? They'd look down. They don't want that attention. They don't like that attention. That's a lot different than lifting up the hands, isn't it? Men lifting up their hands in prayer, and women, downcast eyes. It's not an outward action here that's being required. It's talking about an internal attitude of the heart. It shows up in what we do on the outside, but this is talking about an inward quality. Now, I got to talk about this. That women adorn themselves in modest apparel. What is the modest apparel? Well, you follow that sentence down, it's good works. Good works. And when you compare that to the men holding up their hands in prayer, and what are the women doing in the church? It's much more modest. But they're full of good works. But we got to talk about the way we dress too, don't we? Now, he's going to go on here. Women adore themselves in modest apparel. Now, there is some apparel that it's just immodest. It's immodest. And usually at worship, this isn't a problem. But sometime when you get out of the assembly, the way some women dress, it's immodest, isn't it? And I know everyone can think of examples of that. And I guess you're always thinking about someone that's a little more immodest maybe than we have been. Of course, it might be immodest, but they're worse, and you think something worse. And if that's what you're thinking, you need to stop and think, how am I dressed? How do I appear? And there's clothing, we know, it's just indecent. It's not modest. And a beach doesn't turn it into something modest. Or a pool. Or a school activity like a cheerleader's uniform. Or some sports uniforms. You've seen the volleyball, with the shorts. How much higher do the shorts come before they're immodest? They're just about as high as they can get, aren't they? And these things don't turn something that is immodest into something that is modest. You can't do that. And there may be some activities that say, well, it would be awkward out there to be modest and engage in that activity. If it is, then we can engage in different activities. No one's obligating us to engage in activities that we feel like we're required now to be immodest. So there is immodest apparel. Now, how's an old preacher going to talk about that? Well, it's not easy for me to do that. And it may not be easy anyway, but I tell you, we need some help, ladies. We need help here. You don't want a preacher standing up here going into details on what is modest and what is immodest. And really, when Paul wrote Timothy, he said, Titus, he said, Titus, the older women need to teach this. And it's not that the preacher can't say something about it, but I tell you, what you want things to be effective. And to be more effective if older women taught about modest dress rather than old preachers talk about it, wouldn't it? And that's what he told Timothy, the aged women, that they may teach the younger women. What are they going to teach them? Well, there's a list of things here, but part of it is to be discreet and chaste. And some of the older women can get into the details on this with younger ladies about, let's talk about the way you look like, the way you're dressed today. Let's talk about, and can do that in a way that, well, it would be inappropriate for an old preacher to pull a young lady aside and start pointing that out. But some of the elderly ladies could do that in a way that is appropriate. And mothers, I tell you, mothers, you're older than your daughters. Mothers are to address this with daughters, aren't they? In fact, I got to brag on the mothers in my family, the generation. In fact, they're teaching their children before it's a problem. They're little children, okay? And little children, little children, you can run out of the house without any clothes on, and that's not really a problem. You just bring them back in and try to put something on them. But at little ages, little children, you can begin to show them, oh no, we're not gonna look that way. That wouldn't, and that'll stick. And then as they grow, you don't have to turn it into something else. Well, now that you're 6, or now that you're 9, or now that you're 15, you don't have to do that because you've been teaching these things all along, so that when it does get to be an issue, they already know. They already know. And mothers are the best ones to teach their children about things like this. Now, what does it mean then? Not with broidered hair or gold or pearls or costly array? I mean, does that mean that you can't wear jewelry? You're not supposed to fix your hair? Is that what we're talking about? Well, let's compare this to what Peter said. And he said something very similar, but he added something else. He said here, who's adorning? 1 Peter 3 and verse 3. Let it not be the outward adorning of plaiting the hair and of wearing of gold or putting on apparel. Is he saying women are supposed to wear clothes? Well, no, that's not what he's talking about. What's he talking about? Listen, ladies, your essence is not in your outward appearance. And if that's where you're focused on the wrong thing. Now, wear your clothes. Put on outward apparel, okay? And wear something nice. And if you have jewelry, but don't go overboard with this, thinking this is who I am. That's not what you do. It's the inward person Paul is emphasizing. Now, it'll show up in how you appear outside, but the focus is on the inward person. That women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness and sobriety. These are inward qualities we're talking about. And really, ladies, if you want to adorn, you want to look beautiful, it's good works. Instead of thinking, I've got to have that dress, I've got to have these jewels, I've got to have that hair done, think of good works. You remember Boaz, what attracted him to Ruth? It wasn't how she appeared. He says, I've heard what you've done for your mother-in-law. She was a woman of good works, and it was attractive to Boaz. And that's the adorning of yourself with good works. Now, let's talk about what's this silence and subjection business then. What does it mean to be in silence with all subjection? Let me talk about subjection. Subjection. It's not demeaning to be in subjection. Jesus was subject to his Father. And that was not demeaning to Jesus. It was honorable of him to be subject to his Father. Wives are subject to their husbands. That's not demeaning of wives. It's honorable of wives. Husbands, listen. Okay. Husbands, listen. It never says, make your wives subject, does it? That's not what the husband does. It doesn't say, husbands, make your wives subject to you. No, this is something the woman is to do before God. She's subject to her husband. What does it mean in this context? In subjection. Didn't he just talk about women professing godliness? Women, you're subject to God. That is not demeaning. And being subject to God, you are subject to those God has placed in authority. That's the adorning of yourself. Well, what's this silence? What does it mean, silence? Well, there's two different words for silence. This is different than the word that, I'm not going to pull the text up, but there's a word in 1 Corinthians 14 that says silence. And you could just soon put your hand over your mouth. It means nothing, not a peep. Don't say anything. That's the kind of silence. That's not this word. That's not this word. And again, we're talking about, as these other things, an inward quality of silence. I wonder if silence might be maybe not the best translation here, where it says women learn in silence. I guess if I could rule the world and tell all the translators what to do, I'd say, you just use the word quietness there. It's a little different picture, quietness, an inward quality of quietness. Let me show you where this shows up. Let's look at Peter again. 1 Peter 3. Whose adorning, let it not be adorning of plaiting a hair and wearing a gold or putting on of apparel, but let it be, here it is, the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament. You see what the ornament, doesn't that just fit? What are you going to wear? Wear this ornament. The ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. Some have said, well, it says silent. Well, a woman can't say anything in a Sunday school class. Well, that's not what that's talking about. She can do that in a matter of quietness, with that inner quietness that she maintains. Now, I suffer not a woman to teach, nor usurp authority over a man. Let's look at that word teach and usurp. Remember when he said, I say that men pray everywhere? He wasn't saying women couldn't pray. He's talking about the men that pray lifting their holy hands and are leading the prayer. That's the kind. The women aren't going to lead the prayers, but the women can pray. Well, what about teaching? There's quiet ways to teach. But you're not going to stand up in the pulpit and preach. That's not a quiet way to teach. And then when he says to usurp authority, that word usurp is too strong a word. Most of the translations since the King James Version will have a different word there. And they say not to exercise authority. See, one of the things people say, well, I didn't usurp the authority. They asked me to do this. They gave me the authority to do it. Well, he's talking about not exercising the authority. There's a role for men in the church and a role for women in the church. And don't exercise that authority. Well, now, Paul, he's writing to the church at Ephesus. And I guess there was some cultural thing going on at that time in that place that applied to that. You can't apply that to everyone, for all the churches from all time. He's writing to the church at Ephesus for something they're dealing with. Well, look, he said Adam was first formed, then Eve. He's not talking about culture. He's talking about what God intended from the beginning. You go back and read Genesis 2. Adam was formed, and God told Adam, you may eat of the fruit of every tree in the garden, but of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. In the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. And then later God made woman and brought her to the man. You never read where God told that to the woman. He just told it to Adam. But when the serpent came and tempted Eve, she said, oh no, God hath said that we shall not eat of that fruit. How did she know that? From the beginning, God told Adam and expected him to teach Eve and expected Eve to be in subjection. From the beginning, Adam was first formed, then Eve. And then it says this, and this is a little more difficult. Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Now we read that the serpent beguiled Eve. She was deceived and ate the fruit. She believed the devil's lie, but Adam didn't. Adam was not deceived. And when she gave him the fruit, he was not deceived. He knew it was wrong, and he partook of it anyway. How do you explain that? What does have this to do with it? Well, this is not as easy to explain. I'm wondering if maybe there's a first implied here, that Adam was first formed, then Eve, and Eve was not deceived, but she was the first to partake of the fruit. Maybe there's part of that. But maybe part of it is this way. I tell you, women have great influence over men. In fact, if we men think about it and we'd admit it, that's one of the reasons we like to go to church, because the presence, being in the presence of godly women is good for us men. Now, I know, I surely hope that the ladies think, well, being around godly men is good for women too. And I'm sure it is. But women can have a lot of influence on a man. And it is uplifting and fulfilling and spiritually good for men to be in the presence and with the influence of godly women. Now, Eve usurped her role here. She exercised an authority she did not have and gave Adam fruit that was forbidden. And Adam, he just did that. I tell you, women can do so much good for man and can do so much harm also. And God wasn't going to have this in his church. No, Adam, you need to stay in the lead on this and not the woman take that lead. Now, that may be the reason he said it that way as well. I tell you this is a little difficult to follow that, but the conclusion is not difficult. You may struggle with the reasoning here, but the conclusion is clear, isn't it? And women are not to teach or exercise authority over a man in the church. That's the conclusion. And that remains clear. It's controversial. It's countercultural. But it's clear. Now, notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing. Well, that's a little difficult too. What is this talking about? Remember, we're talking about roles here. And women adorning themselves with good works. And there's some things women are more suited to do than men. There's some things men are more suited to do. You want someone to lead the church in prayer, have a man to do it. But when it comes to childbearing, now women do that. And there's parts of that men can't do. And it's not just giving birth. There's a lot to do with the raising of children. That women are they're just better at this. It's an example of the kind of things that women can do that they're so well suited for. And it doesn't mean that women have to have children to be saved. That's not what it's talking about. But women are to do the things they're the most suited for. And I think it's telling that when God points an example, he talks about motherhood. Doesn't that show how God honors motherhood? Well, there's an example of something that women should be focused on, the bearing of children. And then it says if they continue in faith, in charity, in holiness, with sobriety. Let's talk about women professing godliness. I don't want us to get so hung up on what the roles are and what we can and can't do. Let's talk about some positive things. What is distinguished about women professing godliness? Here it is. Godliness, reverence toward God. Modest, not flamboyant, modest. Shamefacedness, not brazen, downcasting of eyes. Sobriety, not giddy. Let the little girls be giddy. Women, they're things that are serious. We take serious things seriously and sober. Becoming, suitable, fitting, proper, good works. So much of the good works done by the churches are done at the hands of women, aren't they? Full of good works. Silence. This is that quiet kind of silence. The meek and quiet spirit that is of great price. Subjection. Subjection to God. Subjection to those whom God places in authority. And wives and subject to their husbands. It's honorable to be in subjection. Childbearing. To taking care of children. Faith. You might put the idea there, faith. Sometimes the word faith means faithfulness. Faithfulness. Faithful to God. faithful to her husband. Charity. That has to do with good works, doesn't it? It's the word love, translated here charity. And you think charity, think about love in action. Love in action. Holiness. You're not going to be like the world. Well, there's a difference in godly women and worldly women, aren't there? Holy, separate, apart from the world. In purity, dedicated to God. There's a difference. Women professing godliness. I want to thank you, women. The women in the Lord's church, by and large, are characterized by these things. If there's something amiss, they're around other women that characterize these things, and they grow, and they become more godly as they continue. And that godly influence is the salt of the church. Now, I know the church is the salt of the earth, but what about women in the church? They're like the salt of the church. And people say, well, that makes a woman a second-class citizen. Wait just a minute, back up. Man seeth not as God seeth. And God seeth not as man seeth. And you remember what Jesus told his apostles? They that are greatest among you shall be your servants. These are the godly women that are of great price in the eyes of God. Paul's writing Timothy. You read that to him. And now you preach it, Timothy. You preach it. And so that's what this old preacher's trying to do. Follow that same path. I see what Paul's written. I want to preach it. We had an example when we buried Doris. Not long ago, Doris Talley. Look at that. Isn't that Doris Talley? Godly, modest, shamefaced, sober, becoming, good works, quiet, subject, childbearing, faithful, charity, holiness. Isn't that just, I read that off at her funeral because that was Doris Talley. What an example, ladies, that you've had set before you. And what an example you can set. I said, that is the kind of woman that I aspire to be and that I will be. That brings the sermon to a close. I tell you, the way God appeals to the very highest qualities of us, doesn't he? And he knows he has created us in his image, and we can live up to that image, and he has taught us how to do so. When we fail, he's provided a way for us to be forgiven and to have that wiped off and to continue to grow in that manner. If you need to be baptized into Christ, or you need to come forward to confess a sin and be reunited with the church, or if you need our prayers, the invitation's extended while we stand and sing.